Hey, what's going on? Today I bring to you my first guest on this channel, GitHub's developer advocate, Rizel Scarlett. Rizel is an amazing person. We had a chat on contributing to open source, developer advocacy, and building developer communities. This was a really interesting conversation. Even though we had audio issues, video issues when we started, so we recorded, we re-recorded, but we still found a way to make this work, and it turned out so well. So watch till the end and let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you like it, hit the like button and then the subscribe button. Let's dive right in. All right. Yep. So, developer advocacy. I remember the question I asked before, and that's about explaining your role as a developer advocate. Because for me, I've not been able to explain it in a straightforward way yet, and it's been like 5 months since I started doing it officially. So, yep. How about you? If you were to explain it in maybe one sentence or two, what would you say?
Yeah, I don't really like I was saying before, I started a month ago, and even when I like first got the job, everyone's like, "Cool, so what are you going to be doing?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't really know." But the way I will describe it is like my job is to empower engineers and build a community around product by like showing them different ways that they can use our product, but in like a technical way and not in a salesperson-y way. And like essentially I do that by coding something, then I write about it, then I'll like make a talk about it, and I'll just like repeat that same loop over and over again.
Oh, yeah, and the writing part is really great because I've seen your articles and you're a good writer. Have you been
Thank
doing
you.
this? How long have you been writing?
Uh, I don't, I don't know. Like, I haven't done that much like technical writing, but I've always liked writing since I was a kid. So that part has never been like too hard for me. I think I've always been a decent writer since I was a kid.
Nice. What did you write about before technical articles?
Before that, I was just doing like regular day to day blogging, and then like as a kid or like younger
Oh,
version of me, I liked like writing like fictional stories or poetry and stuff like that.
okay.
And also really oddly, like I kind of liked writing essays.
Oh,
Like in school, if the teacher is like, "Oh, you got a
oh,
10-page essay," I'm like, "Ooh, I'm excited."
you're one of those students that other students don't like. You ask for extra homework.
Only in English. In math, no.
Okay, that's fun. My relationship with writing is kind of like a love-hate relationship. I mean, I like seeing the results of my articles, my writing after I've written it. But the process of writing is not so fun because I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. And then after I'm done and I start reading my article, I'm like, oh, that's a very good job. So,
That's me with coding though. Like sometimes I'm like I don't want to get started, and then once the ideas start flowing, I'm like, oh, I'm having fun. And then once I see that final product, I'm like, I
yeah,
cannot believe
you
I
love it.
made it.
Yep, it's yeah, that's really nice. And okay, so as a developer advocate, you write articles. Do you also create videos? And
Yeah,
then
a little bit.
not yet. I'm guessing you have no choice but to create more. So
Yep.
and then you give talks. Is this something you've been doing? Okay, yeah, I know you've been writing before developer advocacy. How about videos and talks?
I haven't been doing too many videos before or after, but giving talks I have. I didn't give talks at like any big conferences, but if I saw like a small conference, I would submit a CFP or like workshops for like different communities I was part of. So like I'm part of this program called Tech Diversity, or I'm an alumni there. So like I would give a talk there, or I also consider like teaching at GCode, giving talks. So
Yeah.
yeah, kind of had a little experience.
Yeah, so what can you tell us about GCode and your work there?
Yeah. So GCode House. So it's not my idea. I'm not the founder, but the founder, Bridget Wallace, noticed that in our area in Massachusetts, particularly in Roxbury, Massachusetts, there's like a ton of gentrification. So a bunch of like white people are making the housing prices be higher. And
Oh,
um, she also noticed that like women of color ages 18 through like 25, that gap is there for like technical stuff. So like you'll have like in high school you might learn a little bit of like there's some programs for high school girls to learn about tech, but not as you like get older. So she thought like, oh my gosh, like there's she's worked in urban development. She's worked with group homes, and she thought like, hey, there's a whole lot of homelessness. Why not? And then there's like all of these other problems. She was like, why not purchase like this really large house and have women of color living here and learning to code? Which I thought was an amazing idea. Um, but the only thing is like the house needs a ton of renovations, and it costs a lot of money to do those renovations. And people were not that interested in investing in us yet, because like one, we're it's people take a little bit longer to invest in black women, I think. And then two, um, we didn't really have much to prove for it that like yes this would work. So me and another colleague named Bailey, we thought like why not like create a more shorter term program where they're not living in the house but kind of like trying it out. So we call it Intro to GCode, and we've been meeting online um, on the weekends, and we kind of like we teach like 15 to 18 women of color about like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then after that program is over, we help them to like either go into a more longer term boot camp, because it's just 10 Sundays, so you can't learn all of software engineering, but it's just a way for them to get their feet wet. So they either do a longer term boot camp or apprenticeships that are willing to pay them and teach them on the job. um like yeah, part of us starting that was one like getting more buy-in, so now people are investing in us a little bit more. But also we thought about our own experiences of like joining a coding boot camp. Both Bailey and I kind of had to like drop our jobs just to go into a coding boot camp, and we were still confused at like what coding really was and would it be beneficial. So we're like providing this for people in a low risk way. Oh, and I keep saying women of color, but it's women and non-binary people of color. So yeah.
women and non-binary. So the non-binary people can include. Oh, okay, I get that. Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
So yeah. So if you're of color, come on down. Yeah.
Okay. All right, I get that. What was the transition like from you said you started with physical learning, so in a house, and then moved to online. What was the transition like? Which was more effective? Which was better generally?
Yeah, and I will clarify. So we didn't start in the house yet. Like she purchased the house, but no one can really go in it because it needs a lot of renovation. Okay. But we did start physical. During the pandemic, we were meeting in the Boston Public Library, and then I mean not during, but before the pandemic. And then once the pandemic hit, we had to go online. The transition was tough. Like one of the issues we had is like we we don't want people to get left behind in our boot camp or our program. A lot of times people like different educational programs are like, if you don't get it, we're still moving on. But we don't want that. And in person, it was easier because you had other mentors who can walk around and like help that person catch up. But now if you're online, people are behind. You can't see if they're behind. Sometimes they're not always speaking up that they're behind, or they're confused. And it's also hard to help them a little bit because you kind of have to like stop the class to just explain to this one person like what's going on. Yeah.
That's true. In my experience, too, physical is always better. I've run a boot camp before, a software engineering boot camp, where I taught HTML, CSS, JavaScript physically. And comparing that to the online parts, the physical is more effective. I also remember, it reminds me of Andela. Andela is a Nigerian company, and how Andela started in Nigeria was a group of founders came to Nigeria and decided that they're going to take engineers, or not engineers, but young people who have not gotten into tech yet, who are interested in tech, train them, and then when they finish training them, when they're employable, they then outsource them to external, like they help give them remote jobs. So it was really effective, because what Andela did when they started was they got a house, a big house, and then everyone who got admitted or into Andela, who got into Andela, got an apartment there. So, and we had a lot of engineers who were learning, so a lot of beginners learning together in the same place physically, and that's very effective. You have a bug, you can just go straight to the other person's room, ask a question, and that's a really nice experience for people starting. And with online, it can be very difficult. You're scared, you're afraid to ask, you don't want to disturb anybody or start messaging or start interrupting the class and all the rest.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. I didn't know that's what Andela was. I've seen it on a couple like LinkedIn's or Twitter's for like some Nigerian engineers, but I had no clue that's what they did. It sounds amazing. But yes, that is like
Yeah.
the biggest problem. Like I'm always like we can't I want to be attentive to everyone. I don't want them to feel confused, but it's so hard because we're on.
Yep, yep. And they all started that way, though you should mention that they've transitioned, so they don't do that anymore. They don't work with beginners anymore in at least Nigeria and Kenya and Uganda. But it was a really cool experience. Yeah. And then yeah. And your work with G Code right now is really great. And you have these online meetings, and I mean, like it's still very effective. A lot of people appreciate this type of meetings, and it's really nice, especially when there's no other option. And yeah, so is that how has that experience helped you with your developer advocacy role right now, if you're comparing?
Yeah, it's taught me two things. Like one, that people learn in different ways, so you have to be able to present the information in different ways. Like I used to get frustrated easily when I like explain something and people are not getting it. I'm like, ugh. And like um that also happened to me when I was a more junior engineer, and senior engineers would be teaching me, and they will like teach me how to do something. And I'm not understanding, and they would just get frustrated because they're like, you got to understand the way that I said it. But once I did G code, I realized, oh my gosh, like I'm now how the senior engineer feels, and I kind of have to like switch my mindset. So I try to provide information in different ways so people can understand it in different ways. Like if you're more visual, if you're more like an auditory learner, so I like that's taught me to like create different content and teach things in different ways. And it's also taught me how to break down um technical concepts so people could understand it more. Yeah. Because, like I'm so used to, like, I don't know, even in education, like, just, I don't know, to me, in the tech community and sometimes in more minority communities, it's just like you have to understand it the way I said it. Even like when I was younger, and like, I don't know if you know, like, the ongoing meme of like your parents teaching you like math or something like that, and they're like, if Johnny had 5 apples, right? Like that doesn't, maybe the kid's not getting it. Try it in a different way and break it down even smaller. So like that's really helped me to like stare away from like very technical words to explain another technical word. Like how is that going to help anybody? So yeah, that's helped me in my role.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the part of breaking things down, you with when you have experience teaching people directly, you know that it's important to not assume that your audience knows. If you want to make any assumption, it has to be clear. Assume that you know JavaScript, so I'm teaching React, and then you don't just start using terms that people have not heard about before. And a lot of people tend to forget. They just when they're teaching or writing, they start using big words that people have not heard about before, and they forget that I'm teaching someone who has not learned this before. So it's really important, and yeah, that's amazing.
And it's understandable though. Like, like if you ever think about 2 plus 2, that's easy to you. It's obviously 4. But if you're teaching that to a little kid, it's harder to like be able to explain why 2 plus 2 is 4.
That's true. I don't even know why. Why is 2 plus 2 4? Okay. What's the what's the biggest challenge right now in teaching people? Let's say if I want to the shortest roadmap for web development, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, version control, working with either IDEs or text editors. What's the most difficult parts? What's the most difficult topic or subject for the in your experience that people find difficult? What's the topic or subject that people find the most difficult to learn? Yeah.
Good question. I think from what I've seen, JavaScript, like loops and stuff like that, really get people. And it's understandable. Like loops are kind of a hard concept and like hard to understand why you're implementing all that. I think people kind of got version control, like they got that down packed. Because I think I'm pretty into version control, so I tried to break it down to them a lot. But I think JavaScript might be like the more scary thing because when you're in HTML and CSS, you're like, cool, this it's a little bit more self-explanatory, but JavaScript is not. It's a lot of logic and teaching them to switch from
Yeah.
that, like switch into like more computational thinking is a little hard, but using the robot make me, I don't know if you're familiar with the robot make me a sandwich game where you essentially just it's common in like coding boot camps and like colleges where you essentially like have someone pretend they're a robot and they don't know anything, and you the students tell them how to build a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and that kind of shows them like, okay, you have to break things down very little for a computer. You have to be specific, so that's kind of how I help transition them, but there's still I still have a lot of improvement to go in teaching people JavaScript.
Yeah, that transition part is usually very difficult because HTML straightforward, CSS straightforward, and then they get to JavaScript, they expect it to, and most times some people learn HTML in like 2 weeks or three, and CSS in like the same amount of time. But they get to JavaScript and they expect it to be at the same time, so they get frustrated. Like HTML was fast, CSS was fast. Why is this so different, so long?
Yeah, that is how it is. And I think I was that way too when I was in my coding boot camp. I was like, oh, look at me with HTML and CSS. And then JavaScript hit, and I was like, I don't know what this is. So it's understandable. But yeah, I'm like, y'all need to understand JavaScript's a whole nother ballgame.
That's true. That's true. There's also this like from my experience, a lot of people have issues with version control too. It's really very difficult. Myself when I started, I learned HTML, CSS, JavaScript long before I even started version control. Because whenever I look at Git and version control, it looks usually scary. A lot of commands and trying to manage a whole lot of things. So I just left it and I kept doing my HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And yep, when I finally started version control, I was wondering why have I not been doing version control in this manner? Because I remember for files, I did version control manually. That means that I would save a file, and then if I want to update it, I create a new file. So that I still have the previous version of the file, and then I start working on this new file, and I'm sure that I'm not going to mess up the other one. So that was my own version of version control back then before I started with Git. And a lot of people still have this problem of understanding Git and GitHub. I want to make commits, push to a repository, and all the rest. So yeah, is there any particular experience you can remember, or how about yourself when you started out with Git and GitHub? What was it like?
Oh yeah, I thought Git and GitHub was scary and confusing. Like, I was already familiar with the command, like the terminal and command line from like being in help desk, but like I just didn't understand the commands. And like you said, sometimes no, not even you said when you change a file, you just start it over. Sometimes if like I just couldn't push to the repo, I would just make a new repo. Like I would be like, I don't know what's going on. I'm just gonna create a new repo. Which is so embarrassing. But okay, for G code, the first time we had G code, I tried to teach Git to them, and it went really badly. I learned a lot, first of all, I tried to teach them Git without them even being comfortable with the terminal. And then everyone had different types of computers. So some people had a Mac, some people had uh, Linux and all that, Windows. So that got very confusing, especially online. Um,
Mm.
but what I've done, and maybe software engineers might cringe at this, but I teach them to use the GitHub UI or like GitHub desktop. It's more
Oh.
self-explanatory. You just come like copy and paste your code, put it into there, and then they get a better understanding of what's happening. And then later on, especially because we only have people want me to teach everything in intro to G code. I'm like, you guys got to remember, this is a introductory program. We only have 10 Sundays to teach them everything. Um, so
Oh.
yeah, so I do that, and then in their boot camps, they learn more Git like from the command line, or we sometimes have like alumni workshop sessions. And for those who are interested in
Okay.
going deeper and learning Git there, they can. And what I even seen at GitHub is like they use the UI a lot. Maybe not for code, but like they make an issue for everything. Like if you want to start
Yeah.
a program or have a Twitter space or do a YouTube show, you got to open an issue. And they just like they're just typing from the UI. So I don't think it's wrong for them to get comfortable and dabble in the UI so they can see what these commands really are doing once they get familiar with it, right? Like git commit is safe.
Yeah, that's better. That's better. Myself, I've forgotten a lot of Git commands, and that's because I use like my IDE WebStorm or VS Code. I use the version control tool there. So I want to make a commit. I just click on the button and click commit, and I want to pull or push. I use buttons. So I hardly work with the command line for Git these days. And GitHub is really nice. A lot of people underrate, or let me say, don't know about the project management tool on GitHub. All the projects I usually work on, I use that. That's what I use. I don't use Jira. I use that project management tool because I can create tasks, convert them to issues, and it's just synchronized with pull request and all that. It's really amazing.
Yeah,
I,
I'm not even sure why. Like everyone complains about Jira, but then they use it. I'm like, you have everything you need on GitHub. Like you're saying, like you create an issue, that issue moves to being in progress or done. You can link it with a
yeah,
pull request. Like it's just like so easy. Yeah, there's just a lot built into GitHub that people they're not aware of, I guess.
yeah. Well, I hope more people will discover, as you're a developer advocate now for GitHub, so more people get to know about that too. And one thing I like about GitHub is that I we can really find anything we want on GitHub when we talk about developer codes and all the rest. When I hear open source right now, I think GitHub too. GitHub has there are other tools apart from GitHub for Git integration and all that, but GitHub is the biggest because when I hear of open source, I think GitHub. Uh, any major software you see out there that's open source, it's on GitHub. Even those that are closed source, many of them are on GitHub. And talking about open source, when I say open source, what do you think? What do you think about open source first, and what do you understand by open source? So, like, what's open source? Yeah.
Um, I will say when you say open source, immediately my brain says free software and then software that other developers can dabble in and have an opportunity to make better, right? I think of the word community at first. And I wrote an article about like being scared to contribute to open source. At first I thought it was scary because every time I like went on social media, people would be like, open source communities are so not inclusive and people are mean, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm already scared to like have someone critique my PR. I don't want I don't want this to happen. So but now like now that I've participated in it, I just think community, free software, opportunity to build your skills. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. It's not always free though, right? There's some open source projects that are still paid, I think, probably.
That's true.
And yeah, it can be really scary to get started. As someone who has not done open source before, if I want to get started, what do I do? How do I even get started? Like right now, I know open source is about community software code that we can see, GitHub, but I want to get started with open source. I want to contribute to this open source. What do I do?
What do I do? Yeah, I would suggest they go to firsttimersonly.com. Let me make sure that is the yes, that is the name of the website. I would suggest they go to firsttimersonly.com because on that you basically have an opportunity to practice making your first PR. And because the workflow to contribute or to create a PR on an open source project is a little different than work because you got to like fork it and all that. So they have the opportunity for you to practice that, and then they also have resources or links for you to find good first issues. So I would definitely say check that out, and or think of projects that you like using, right? Like if you use React a lot, you're already familiar with it. Like check that out. Check out their repo. Check out things you're interested in, and look for good first issues. And I think one thing that's also helped me is like joining whatever Slack or Discord that project has. That way, I'll be able to better like contact the contributors and the maintainers and develop that relationship with them. That like if I got stuck or I was confused, I can message them. So those are my tips for uh, people who are more introductory.
That's really amazing. And yeah, I know something. One thing that helps with open source contribution and developer contribution in general is joining communities. Like in Nigeria here, we have For Loop Africa. There are Google developer groups like GDG Lagos and GDG Yaba and all the rest. There are also Facebook developer groups. There's the New Dev community which I built, and there are other communities. Yeah. How about you? Are there any communities that come to your mind that you can recommend?
Yeah, there's this community called the Data Structures for Black Engineer. I think I'm saying it wrong, but it's a Facebook um, it's a Facebook group. And then also Open Sauce is a good one if you want to. It's my manager's community and also his open source project. But they're like very active. They're very friendly. So if you want to talk to people, learn more about open source, they're definitely a good resource. Um, what other developer communities? Is this just to make sure? Is this general developer communities or ones that are focused on open source?
General developer community.
Yeah, okay, cool. I also like Women Who Code. That's a really good one. They always have really good like presentations that are going on, and they're um they yeah, they have very engaging presentations, whether it be about like career advancement or just like technology wise. And then there's a Discord group called Black, so BLACC. And that's a good one too. Like there's a ton of like good networking opportunities, and Dev Color. Sorry, I can name a bunch of them, but I will stop here.
Nice. So that's a pretty long list. So yeah, there are so many options. Okay. Yeah. One other question. I mentioned that I'm building the new dev community, and you've also been part of building a community like the GCode community. What's it like? What's that experience or process like? If as a person I'm interested in this community building, I want to be part of the organizers. I want to start a developer community. I want to build a developer community. What are the things to note? What should I do? What should I take note of? What should I remember?
Yeah, I think you should remember to have some kind of code of conduct or like setting expectations so people can feel comfortable and respected and included in that space. Because if not, like, people are not going to want to be part of that community. It can eventually end up being toxic. Um, I think also, what is another thing? I think I have being don't act like you're the this big leader. At least that's what I think. Like don't act like you're like this like big overhead um, person that you're like, all right, this is how this is gonna go. Like, listen to the people in your group, figure out, listen to feedback, get feedback every so often. Like, we get feedback from G Code after every single session. Like, what did you not like, and what could we have changed to make this better for you? And then what did you like, and what should we continue? Like, that's very important so that you know how your community members feel, and you have them coming back each time. Um, and just letting the community, like, you still have to have like a certain standard of how you want the community to be, but let the community members also kind of define how they want it to be as well, if that makes any sense.
It does. It does. Amazing. And then for platforms, look out for platforms like Slack or like
Oh
Facebook
yeah.
groups. Yeah, where your community members can meet and talk to each other.
I forgot that
Okay.
part. Yeah, yeah. Slack, Discord, like those common popular ones.
Yep, that's really great. Yeah, the same thing for new dev too. We have a Slack workspace, we have a Facebook developer group, and currently working on a resource app and a community app, so our own application where people can comment, interact with each other. So, yep, that's yeah, it is. It's an interesting experience because it then translates into so many other things and not just coding this time around, not just writing code. You know, interacting with people. It's just like running a business. So yeah, it's really amazing. Really amazing what you're doing at G Code. I love when people do things like this, things like what you do. It's nice. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
Amazing
you
stuff
don't
you're
know.
doing too.
Thanks. Because the number of people that are going to be reached from these communities, these things we do there, it's a lot. It's a lot because there are people you're going to reach directly, and those ones you reach directly are going to reach other people, and then it keeps multiplying. So that's really
Oh,
nice.
that is so true. Yeah, because I feel like I was inspired by other programs that I was in. And like, I was like, yeah, I'll do G Code because other Brazilian coders hack diversity helped me. So you're right. Hopefully, someone from G Code will feel just as inspired and do something else.
Yep, that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. So, yeah, that's all the questions I have. Any last thing you want to tell my audience and anything you want to plug? You want to tell us about anything you're working on or we should check out?
Hmm. You should follow me on Twitter because I'm going to start being more consistent with having Twitter spaces. The next one that's coming up is going to be talking about like how to be a better mentor and teacher to people who are more junior and learning to code. And I'm going to have Leon Noel on there, who was actually my teacher in Resilient Coders. So follow me on
Nice.
Black Girl Bites on Twitter.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Rizel, thank you very much for joining me. This has been a really nice chat.
All right, thank you. Yeah, this was a great chat. Thanks for inviting me. This was fun.
All right, and that's it for today's episode of bringing a guest to the channel. Okay, let me know what you think about this conversation. Let me know if you want me to keep bringing more people to this channel. I mean, I have to. I'm going to bring more people. This went well. And then also let me know who you would want me to bring here next. All right, see you in my next video. Bye. Hey, don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, bye.